Weathering an O-Scale Hopper by Richard DeVizio. The first order of business is fading the car. In looking at the unweathered car, I decided the first order of business was to fade the car down a bit and grime it up before I started to add any kind of rust detailing. I mixed a custom gray color that was slightly darker than the car's original color using Winsor & Newton zinc white and ivory black gouache, thinned with Windex, combined with Winsor & Newton's raw umber water-soluble oil paint from their artisan line. I mixed these colors, keeping a close eye on the consistency until I got a dark brownish / grayish tone that would still be transparent as it was applied to the car. I quickly applied the custom wash to the side panels, brushing up and down until the whole side was covered. Working fast while the side was still wet, I took a wedge-shaped cosmetic sponge and dabbed the side of the car left to right, up and down and back again until I achieved the desired grimy / faded look I wanted. Note, by doing this, you're actually taking off what you just put on. And if more is taken off in one spot than the other, you can reveal more of the car's original color, which simulates that the panel's rusting is slowly taking over the metal. This photo shows a completed side after the first wash has been applied and sponged. Now moving on to fading the letters. Once both sides were complete, I wanted to tone down the lettering without disturbing the panel color, so I used the same dark gray gouache mixture and a torn cosmetic sponge to carefully dab the color on, touching only the lettering. Once the sides of the car were complete, I concentrated on the surrounding areas, the sides of the roof walk, the lower sills and ladders, and the sloping roof line under the roof walk. So here's my magic takeoff technique. The areas I just spoke of were treated with the same wash as the sides were. A couple of minutes after those areas were visibly dry, I took a brush dipped in some rubbing alcohol and stippled all those same areas to take off what had just been applied. By doing this, it creates the look of build-up dirt over time. As far as the finer detailing on panel seams, bolts, and where the supports meet their attaching points, we will fine-tune those areas later once the whole car has a base layer of grime. Moving on to the end detailing. I approached both ends of the car the same way by giving them a base coat of grime. I make sure that where the rungs of the ladder are attached and anywhere the end of the car collects the dirt kicked up from the wheels, that I'm treating those areas with some special attention. The grime wash will take care of the basic grooves that need to be filled with collected dirt. But to create the kicked up splatter from the wheels, I lightly grime the end of the car, not going as dark as the sides of the car, since this area is a bit more protected. While the surface was still wet, I took a dry brush with some weathering powders on it and, holding the car vertically, lightly tapped the back end of the car. By doing this, the powder is randomly dropped in specks onto the wet surface, and you leave it to dry without touching it. You will seal this later using dull coat from an airbrush. For griming up the hopper bays, bolts, and other equipment, it's the same as before. Just dirty up these areas according to what you feel this car has been exposed to over time. Now moving on to the roof and hatches. My first step in getting the roof and hatches looking right is to just get them stained a bit lighter than the sides of the car. Using my same grime wash and thinning it out a bit with some alcohol on my brush, I quickly covered the whole top and worked in the wash where I felt that dirt can collect. Taking a cosmetic sponge and wetting it with some rubbing alcohol, lightly dab the top of the car end to end to achieve a slightly stained looking roof. I mixed up a small batch of black and white gouache with water-soluble raw umber oils for a kind of rusty gray and sponged the top of the hatches. I let the hatches dry a bit, maybe 15 minutes, then came back and using a brush dipped in alcohol, began to stipple off what I had just put on in random dabs. Keep wiping off your brush in between to keep from transferring the same color back onto the hatch. What you're trying to do is reveal some of the gray part of the hatch. Now, almost the same process will be done on the curved rooftop in between the hatches. Taking your alcohol dipped brush will now take away from what we sponged on before, leaving behind the effect you see. Now you may notice a pattern here. I'll put the paint on, then I'll take the paint off. Doing this is great because taking it off is easier than putting it on. Artists call this blocking, or getting your basic colors onto the canvas and then worrying about the detailing later. The same approach goes here. As I mixed up some burnt and raw sienna and applied that to the side of the hopper cylinder and curved roof line, taking my soft brush to the surface, will begin to stipple the fresh color, softening the texture pattern I'm creating until I get the look I want. Once that is dried for about 15 minutes, I'll go back and hit the car with the alcohol dipped brush again and stipple some more to enhance the textured look. What's nice about this is that you can always work in your color around the supports, bolts, seams, etc., and then go back over those areas and take off the color, leaving behind whatever gets caught in the cracks, for a nice effect of dirt or rust collected over time. Moving on to rust on the roof. Using the same on and off technique, I applied the same mixture to the top of the car and to the hatches, and used my alcohol dip brush to take off and to soften the rust effect at the same time. Rust pits and streaks. Using a blend of burnt sienna and raw umber water-soluble oils, which I actually like, I use a fine brush to place my rust pits and then slightly soften them with a dry brush. If I intend to have a streak of rust coming down from the pit, I will wet the area just below it with Microsol and proceed to paint the streak coming down. I do it this way because my brush will glide better on a wet surface. Once the streak is down, I can make it finer by using a wet brush dipped in Microsol and pass the brush right down alongside the streak to sharpen it up. If I want to soften the streak, I'll just use a damp brush and dab the streak, which will feather it out a bit. Well, the ends get detailed again. The ends of the hopper also need some rusting because rusty rainwater drips down over time from the roof walk onto the inside portion of the ends of the car. The wheels from the cars on either end also kick up water over time and continually take a toll on the ends of the car. Nothing but some stippling and softening of my water-soluble oils here to create the look of rust slowly trying to take over the ends of this car. Then there's couplers. Getting the right color and texture that I wanted for the couplers was a blend of the water-soluble oils using raw umber and burnt sienna brushed on, and then using a cosmetic sponge with some paint mixture on the end of it. I dabbed it all over the coupler to get a subtle texture. The sponge will do that. It'll give you that texture that you're looking for. The same goes with the coupler box. Now on to the trucks. I took apart the trucks, laid them out, and spray painted them with Rust-Oleum primer, which actually has a kind of oxide reddish / rust color. I use it as my base coat. I then used the same sponging technique as I did for the couplers, using the raw umber and burnt sienna. To make the trucks have an illusion of realism, character, and depth, I sponged the edges and bearing caps with a mixture of white gouache that I toned down by blending it with the mixture I used for the trucks. On to wheels. I first masked the treads by placing my wheels in a kind of jig I created using a threaded pipe coupler that I found at my local hardware store. The face of the wheel sits perfectly into the fitting, and another fitting is placed on top. Then I spray my base coat of Rust-Oleum primer and stipple to brush the wheels with some of the raw umber and burnt sienna mixture until I get the look that I want. When everything had dried and I was satisfied with the results, I sealed the paint layers using a coat of airbrush dull coat and reassembled the car.